2008, with a recent promotion, two baby daughters, and a happy marriage, I did the unthinkable. I quit my job here at Lilly. I walked away from the desk. I once swore I would only leave upon my death. Actually, I think I once asked my parents to bury me in my swivel chair with my binders. I couldn't risk getting to the afterlife and not having my tools. So when the LillyX committee asked me to speak about work-life dynamics, I was certain they'd made a mistake. However, a lot of my freelance writing is about turning conventional wisdom on its head. So when they asked for that kind of talk, I said, okay, please sign me up. And then I did the next logical thing. I dug into research. I analyzed recent data. Guys, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I did what any of you would have done. I bought new shoes. But in all seriousness, I think we can all agree that we have a mutual disdain for the phrase work-life balance. To apply that term as it's been used in our current culture, I would be giving this talk in my athleisure wear. And before I began speaking, I would have turned on the washer and the dryer and the Instapot. I would also be checking my phone every few minutes for emails. Balance in America is not balance. It's multitasking. And worse than that, it's wasting an unreal amount of energy on having this quote unquote living our best lives scenario. As I built a career and a family, I assumed my life was just a chemistry equation I would need to balance, and it would look a bit like this. I really thought my ability to leave a legacy was contingent upon this equation. It's a lie, but an easy one to buy into. America loves a good pursuit of happiness, even if it's a wild goose chase. The problem with this equation is not just that it's unsolvable. It's also in the wrong scientific domain. While we've spent our careers thinking all of life is chemistry, I'm here to tell you that the celebrating of your life is actually physics. Life is not about balancing. It's about orbiting. When we say balance, we divide our lives into opposing domains, which is a reality that died with the information age. Work is now life and life is now work. And much like you, I negotiate contracts at cross-country meets. Our lives are orbital, spiraling forward in time. The components of our lives rotate around us, with opportunities and choices coming in and out of our atmospheres. Our goal isn't to get everything to teeter perfectly on a scale, but rather to make choices that keep us aligned to our center of gravity, and more importantly, moving forward in a meaningful and healthy way. So back to that fateful day in 2008 when both babies had the flu, my husband was out of town on business, and I had a data lock bearing down upon me. I hit the pause button. I decided if I was unhappy with my current juggling act, maybe I could be happy if I became Mary Poppins meets Jillian Michaels meets Marie Kondo. Basically, I just bought a different equation. Far less stressful, but full of false narratives nonetheless. Becoming a stay-at-home mother taught me quickly and rather harshly that perspective is everything when it comes to living with joy. I'll never forget the last thing I said to Liza Aldridge in the summer of '08 when I left my cubicle for the last time. I'll be back once I get this whole kid thing straightened out. Like my life was something I could project manage. And eventually I'd look around my home and say, family box? Check. My family now jokes that I'm 12 years into a 3-year scientific leave of absence. So, it's going really well. Balance, pursuits of passion, sustainable orbits. These are points of view, not a product of our circumstances. I'm going to highlight 3 of the most destructive lies which wreck our ability to achieve a sustainable orbit, followed by 2 steps you can take to fill your life with celebration. So first, breathe. You solve the impossible equation, and now that you know it can't be solved, just let it go. We can have it all, just not at the same time. But it's more important that you go after the all that you want and not what American culture is telling you to want. Social comparison theory, fathered by Dr. Leon Festinger in the 50s, is some of the most repeatable research in history. Humans determine their worth based on how they stack up against others. On rare occasions, we do this well and we use it as motivation, but usually comparison leads to discouragement and regret. My older sister, and I like to say older because she's a whopping 53 weeks older than I am, is really great at avoiding the comparison trap. She has a full career, which lives in orbit to her teenage daughter's year-round volleyball schedule. Her daughter and husband are morning people, and Jenny and I are not. So she gladly lets them go without her to the early matches and joins them later. I asked her if she worried that the other moms were judging her for missing the earliest matches, and she just laughed and laughed. Of course they are. But how is their judgment more valuable than her rest? A few summers ago, I also failed to drag her to our high school reunion where she has a lot of friends. Because as she said to me that day, I'm not in the mood to be an Instagram prop. Simply put, Jenny is my hero. So set aside your fear of missing out and how you think you'll be perceived. They steal your time, push you to do more than is humanly possible, and distract you from the beauty that is present in your life. Okay, on to our second deep breath. Measurable impact is a great phrase in research, but most of the good you do in your life will never be measured. All of you in some way are making the world a better place, but most of what you affect, you'll never see. You can never know the full change created by the Lilly Day of Service, or what happened to the future of the patient you greenlighted into a trial, or the effects you've had on people you've mentored. These are world-changing actions that ripple gently across time, but egos and stressing about our impact are distractions. Let them go. At the end of Dr. Donna Markova's poem, The Art of the Possible, she writes her perspective on how a healthy ego relates to impact. I choose to risk my significance, so to live so that which came to me as seed goes on to the next as blossom, and that which came to me as blossom goes on as fruit. And finally, I promise none of you lack the new buzzword, passion. This used to be a great word before it got adopted by social media. If you start each day with a full dose of passion, you're sure to be killing it, right? This dynamic plays out most notably in our personal brands, where we are pulled to be authentic in a messy hair, don't care kind of social media post, or we must prove that we're crushing it. I find this all very exhausting. And while it's funny, it's hard to imitate hyperbolic caricatures in real life. If you're looking for inspiration, I'm about to show you it's not any further away than inside of yourself. Now that we've turned away from the lies, the next stage involves tuning into your authentic story. So the first step to celebrating life is to celebrate you. A phrase I borrowed from a mentor is know your non-negotiables. What are the elements of your life so intrinsic to who you are that you begin to disappear if they aren't present? These pieces create your center of gravity. I have found Stephanie Smart's workbook, Soul Song Dancing, to be a great tool for honing in on the core elements that make me tick. Everything else I studied seemed to be separated into being effective at home or being effective at work. But in reality, I don't need to be more effective as much as I just need to feel centered in the madness. When I returned from Stephanie's class, I looked around my house and I realized my home was more a reflection of binge watching HGTV than a reflection of who I am. If my husband and I love books, why were all the bookshelves in the darkest corners of our home? If I love to host dinner parties, why did the dining room table only seat 4? Dr. Amy Verzanowski, a Yale professor of organizational behavior, found in her research that productivity at work increased 15% in people who invested in their workspaces in small but personal ways. A few family photos, a copy of beloved art, or just using favorite colors were enough. The tiniest acts of surrounding you with you creates a renewable energy which will help you sustain the orbit of your life. As it turns out, you may not need a new app or a side hustle. What you may need is more of you. As for me, I knew my family was at my center, but the rest of me had been lost in the shuffle of raising kids. My first need was to get back to Nantucket, a place I lived in my 20s. It sounds trivial, but traveling there brings me immense joy. I was ready for some part-time entrepreneurial work that required my creative energies, and my skill set meant party planner was a logical move. In honor of my Lilly career, when I get stuck making something, I like to whisper, it's time to create answers. I mean, decorations that matter. Next, I started planting roses, which also popped up in my soul song work. And finally, I began creating traditions, which I found creates that ripple effect I mentioned earlier. I resurrected an annual Academy Awards party from my 20s, and I host a princess giving for a large group of millennials I mentor. I also host a Christmas Eve open house for my friends that I call the Champagne Brunch. None of these pictures are perfect. The first year I hosted the Academy party, I spent the entire ceremony in the ER after I sliced through my thumb. Last year at Princess Giving, my table literally caught on fire. But I know this, my life is far more enjoyable, and I'm far more enjoyable to be around when my life has me in it. So I end this step with a simple question. Where can you weave your DNA into the world around you? After you discover your center of gravity, the hard second truth is that you may have to adapt. My World War II Navy grandpa likes to say it to me like this. In life, shorty, you got to learn how to get along a little bit. I've had to adapt in order to thrive. I think our current culture would like us to believe sacrifices are for suckers, and if you just want it badly enough, you can make it come to life. I would never lie to you and say I love my current career more than I loved my work at Lilly. What I do now is an adaptation based on my life circumstances. Do I miss Lilly neuroscience? Absolutely. But the grown-up choice is accepting that I actively chose my job. Happiness about my choices is, again, entirely up to me. To keep my shingle above my door, I do everything from conference planning to freelance writing to workshops. So if you're wondering where your Lilly skills could be put to good use in the community around you, trust me, if you work here, your volunteerism is invaluable everywhere. And in fact, you may bring a tool chest larger than anyone can use, but I'll cover that in a moment. If you find you're a person with many interests, I recommend How to Be Everything, a guide for those who still don't know what they want to be when they grow up by Emily Wapnick. Her TED Talk on the topic of multi-potentialites is really fun, and her book shows how to enjoy hobbies and a career at the same time. So what have I learned about adapting now that I live off Lilly Island? My very first month on the job at Lilly, I was invited to a Sunday canoeing trip with other Lilly professionals. I showed up with a six-pack of beer and a radio. I will never forget the horrified looks on the faces of my new colleagues. They were not dressed for a Sunday brews cruise. They were dressed for Olympic trials. They were in full sporting gear, and worse yet, they had stopwatches around their necks. Now, I definitely became a Lilly stopwatch kind of gal. So staying at home was like being slapped in the face. Nothing at home runs like Lilly. Nothing. Running a house is the opposite of Six Sigma. Jumping back into work was equally eye-opening. My first gig was at a large nonprofit. My first hard lesson. For-profit are not the same as not-for-profits when it comes to decision making. I went into that job ready to achieve goals at all costs. The program I was assigned to won an international award, but I think it would be accurate to say not only did I step on some toes, I stepped on all the toes. My second not-for-profit contract is now in its fourth consecutive year and going far more smoothly. I tried to volunteer at church, assuming my level of enthusiasm would be a good fit for church. But as it turns out, the type of project management needed to launch a global research trial may turn off volunteers at the donut table. I've had an extremely fulfilling volunteer life at my kids' school, but upon reflection, it may be because a sizable percentage of parents work at Lilly. So I've now coined a phrase whenever I join a new gig. Does anyone here speak Lilly? The takeaway here is this. When volunteering outside of Lilly, learn the culture before bringing your own. Get the lay of the land before deciding the Lilly way is the best way. The Lilly way is a phenomenal way. Your communities desperately need your volunteerism and all the structure and strength you can bring. You just may have to adapt this style to activities outside of these walls in order to get along a little bit. I hope as you move forward from our time together, you choose to add some flexibility into your orbit because as this year has shown us, there will come events which throw us completely off our trajectory. The human existence is fraught with unexpected glitches. In the spring of 2019, my family survived what we now call the Spring of Eight. In March, my nephew died in a car accident, and his father died from broken heart syndrome 6 weeks later. In April, my best friend lost her mom to brain cancer, which was a painful and exhausting death. I attended 2 more funerals that month, so by mid-May, I was helping my friends and my parents with every grief-based illness imaginable. Thinking my hands could not get more full, the last week of May, my best friend and I rushed to an ICU in Virginia to help our dearest friends of 30 years, Angie and JJ. JJ had suffered a stroke at the age of 46, and he died on Memorial Day. We had to head back to Indy quickly because my husband's friend was killed in a car accident a few days prior, so we had yet another funeral to attend, and I had a eulogy to write. This timing means that Amy and I drove right through the EF3 tornadoes, which ripped through Ohio on May 27th of 2019. We tried to take shelter inside a locked gas station McDonald's. You know how Lilly teaches you to jump all hurdles? Well, I broke my wedding ring in half, but I got into that gas station. I have never prayed like the midnight I heard an EF3 go over my head as I crouched in a greasy, pitch black McDonald's, drowning in grief, wondering what had become of my happy life. To bring the Spring of Eight to an end, our cat of 16 years died in our arms. We tried to return to our normal routine, but it didn't work. So we packed up the minivan and headed to Nantucket, where we literally stopped and smelled the roses. We took the time to simply grieve all we had endured. The day we came home, I curled up in my grandpa's living room chair and asked him, why? And he said, celebrate the waves that knock you over because those waves represent the people you love. And one day you may outlive them and find yourself alone. Your biggest regret will be that you only saw challenges and missed the fact that you had a wonderful life. Be careful where you focus. Don't miss the chance to enjoy the ride. On this last deep breath, there are 3 words I hope you'll take to heart. You are enough. You and what you love are worthy of celebration. Right now, as you are, overwhelmed by your lists and your sick parents and your toddlers who threw glitter all over the cats, true story, and your school-age kids who used your china to create a hamster obstacle course. True story. And your teens telling you that they find your existence embarrassing. True story. You are enough. You are doing more than enough with your one precious life. I hope you'll keep a healthy perspective, stay nimble, and fill yourself with enough joy that you have some to share. Thank you.